The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension, the air thick with the weight of a decision that could alter the course of history. Representatives from dozens of species argued in a cacophony of voices, their holographic forms shimmering above the grand obsidian table. Beneath the vaulted ceiling of the chamber, projections of galaxies spun slowly, a reminder of the Council's vast domain. But today, all attention was focused on one small blue planet on the edge of the galactic map, Earth. Humans are a nuisance, nothing more, General Morvith growled, his voice a sharp contrast to the ambient hum of the room. The reptilian warrior stood tall, his silver armor catching the faint glow of the holographic display. They lack the technology, the discipline, and the strength to oppose us. If we strike now, their world will fall within days. A chorus of agreement rippled through the council. Morvith smirked, basking in their approval. He was young for his rank, his ambition matched only by his disdain for those who questioned his judgment. To him, humans were an afterthought, an insignificant species clinging to a fragile planet. The doors to the chamber hissed open, drawing every eye to the figure entering the room. The sound of his uneven steps echoed, each thud of his staff against the polished floor resonating with deliberate defiance. Commander Larneth had arrived. The veteran's presence was commanding, even in silence. His towering frame, cloaked in the tattered remains of a military uniform, bore the scars of countless battles. His right arm was a sleek cybernetic replacement, its metallic fingers flexing unconsciously as if haunted by memories of war. A deep scar ran from his temple to his jawline, a permanent reminder of a life spent in the crucible of conflict. Despite his age and injuries, his eyes burned with an intensity that silenced the room. Morvith's smirk faltered as Larneth approached, his staff tapping steadily. The veteran stopped at the center of the chamber, the holographic projections flickering around him like restless spirits. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on each representative as if weighing their worth. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried the weight of a storm. "I have seen what you seek to destroy," Larneth began, his tone measured, deliberate. "And I have survived it." Murmurs rippled through the council, but no one dared interrupt. Larneth's reputation preceded him. He was a relic of an era when the galaxy's peace had been forged through bloodshed. His victories were legendary, his losses even more so. "They called it the Soul Campaign," he continued, his cybernetic hand gripping the edge of the table. "A routine operation," they said, a chance to remind the humans of their place. My fleet was the pride of the Empire, armed with the finest technology, manned by the best soldiers. We were unstoppable. Zarketh paused, his gaze distant, as if staring into the void of memory. "We thought it would be easy. They were primitive, after all. Their weapons were crude, their tactics outdated. We landed on their colony, expecting to find a terrified populace. Instead, we found nothing." The room was deathly silent. Even Morvith seemed captivated, his arrogance momentarily subdued. "The humans didn't fight us head-on," Larneth said, his voice hardening. "They disappeared into the shadows, striking when we least expected. They turned their weakness into strength, their desperation into a weapon. We laughed when we found their traps. At first, simple devices, almost childish in design. But they worked. And then the laughter stopped." He straightened, his cybernetic arm twitching, as if remembering its own destruction. "They didn't fight like us. They didn't play by our rules. They were relentless, unpredictable, and cruel. They made war their theater, and we were their audience." Morvith scoffed, breaking the spell. "This is nothing more than the ramblings of a washed-up soldier. You let your fear cloud your judgment, Larneth. We are the Galactic Empire. We do not cower before primitive apes." Zarketh turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "Fear? No, Morvith. Fear is rational. Fear keeps you alive. What I felt in the Soul Campaign was something else. Something darker. Have you ever faced an enemy that laughed as you burned? That sang songs as they buried your comrades? The younger general bristled, but Larnath pressed on, his voice rising. Humans don't fear war because they've lived with it for millennia. They've perfected it. They've turned it into an art, a game, a spectacle. You think they'll cower before your fleet? They'll welcome it. They'll mock it. And then they'll destroy it. The chamber erupted into debate, voices clashing as representatives argued over the veteran's warning. Larna stepped back, letting the chaos unfold. His work was done. He had delivered his message. Whether they heeded it was another matter entirely. As the noise grew, Morvatha's voice cut through, sharp and commanding. Enough! We waste time listening to the delusions of a relic. The Council must act decisively. The humans are a threat only because we allow them to be. I propose an immediate strike to end this farce. A wave of support surged through the room. Larnath watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When the vote was called, he turned and began to walk away, his staff tapping rhythmically against the floor. At the threshold, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "You've made your decision," he said, his voice carrying an edge of finality. "But remember this, humans don't fear war. They make fun of it, and when you meet them on the battlefield, you'll wish you had listened." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving the Council to their fate. The hum of the dropship's engines was the only sound as Commander Larnath surveyed the rows of elite soldiers seated before him. Clad in black armor adorned with glowing insignias, they sat rigid and silent, their helmets concealing their faces. The faint blue light from the control panels illuminated their metallic forms, making them appear more machine than flesh. Larnatha's gaze lingered on each of them. Proud warriors of the Galactic Empire, trained to eliminate any threat with ruthless precision. He felt a pang of unease. They were perfect soldiers, but perfection often bred overconfidence. "This will be quick," he said, his voice amplified by the dropship's comm system. "The human colony below is isolated. Minimal defenses. Our objective is to secure the site, neutralize any resistance, and leave before they even realize we've been here." His words were met with a sharp salute, their discipline unyielding. Yet, behind their visors, he knew they harbored the same disdain for this mission as he did. Humans were seen as little more than pests in the galactic hierarchy, resourceful but primitive, a species destined for subjugation. This operation, officially labeled as a pacification campaign, was hardly worth the Empire's finest. As the dropship descended, the colony came into view on the holo display. It was a modest settlement, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests. Larnath had reviewed the intelligence reports. Population under 10,000, minimal technological capabilities, and no notable military presence. It should have been an easy victory. Yet, the quietness of the valley, the lack of movement unnerved him. The dropship landed with a soft thud, its hatch hissing open. Larnath led the charge, his cybernetic arm gripping a plasma rifle. His soldiers fanned out in perfect formation, their movements fluid and calculated. The streets of the colony were eerily empty, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the faint whir of their equipment. Buildings stood abandoned, their doors ajar, as if the residents had vanished mid-step. "Clear the area," Larnath ordered, his voice sharp. "Find them." The squad dispersed, methodically sweeping the settlement. Larnath moved through the deserted streets, his senses on high alert. The humans had to be here. No evacuation could have been this clean, this quiet. The absence of resistance felt wrong, like stepping into a trap that hadn't yet been sprung. "Commander," one of his officers called through the comms. "We found something." Zarkith followed the signal to a large warehouse near the edge of the settlement. The interior was dimly lit, filled with crates and equipment. In the center of the room, a single table stood, and on it, a crude hologram flickered to life. It was a recording. Human voices, distorted but clear. "Welcome, invaders," a voice said, laced with mockery. "We hope you enjoy your stay. We've prepared a few surprises for you." Before Larnath could react, the recording ended, replaced by the sound of a low, mechanical hum. His cybernetic sensors flared, detecting a spike in energy signatures. "Everyone out now," he barked. The warning came too late. The explosion tore through the warehouse, a wave of fire and shrapnel engulfing everything. Larneth was thrown to the ground, his cybernetic arm absorbing the brunt of the impact. Around him, soldiers scrambled, their once perfect formation shattered. The humans had left them a message, not with words, but with devastation. As Larneth staggered to his feet, his comms crackled with frantic voices. "Ambush! They're everywhere!" The forest around the colony erupted with gunfire. Human forces, clad in mismatched gear and using outdated weapons, emerged from the treeline. They were outnumbered and outgunned, yet they fought with a ferocity that defied logic. Every move they made was calculated chaos. Explosions diverted attention, while snipers picked off soldiers one by one. Larneth watched as his elite warriors faltered, their confidence crumbling under the unrelenting assault. He rallied his troops, directing them to form a defensive perimeter. Plasma bolts lit up the night as the battle raged, but it was clear they were being toyed with. The humans struck and retreated, drawing the Empire's forces deeper into the forest, where the terrain worked against them. Traps were everywhere, mines hidden beneath the undergrowth, tripwires rigged to explosives, even sharpened stakes embedded in the ground. Each step forward came at a cost. Zarkatha's cybernetic arm burned from overuse, his plasma rifle nearly depleted. He fought with the determination of a man who had seen too many battles, yet even he couldn't shake the feeling that this one was different. The humans didn't just want to win. They wanted to humiliate them. A sharp whistle cut through the air, a signal. Larneth turned just in time to see a human soldier step into the clearing. Unlike the others, this one wasn't hiding. He wore no armor, only a dark jacket and a scarf that obscured his face. In his hands was an antique rifle, its design centuries old. It was absurdly primitive compared to the Empire's weapons, yet the man held it with the confidence of someone who had mastered its use. Zarketh raised his plasma rifle, but before he could fire, the human moved. In a single, fluid motion, he aimed and fired. The shot struck the plasma rifle, rendering it useless. Larneth dropped the weapon, his cybernetic fingers sparking. The human didn't flinch, didn't follow up. He simply stood there, as if daring Larneth to make the next move. The commander hesitated. This wasn't strategy or luck. This was something deeper, an understanding of warfare that transcended technology. Before Larneth could react, the human melted back into the shadows, leaving him with a stark realization. The battle dragged on, but the outcome was inevitable. By dawn, the colony was a smoldering ruin, and Larneth's forces were in full retreat. Of the hundreds he had brought, only a handful remained. As they limped back to their dropship, Larneth felt the weight of his failure. It wasn't just a loss of soldiers or equipment. It was the loss of certainty. The humans had shattered the illusion of superiority, exposing the Empire's arrogance for what it was. As the dropship ascended, Larneth looked down at the battlefield. The humans had fought with cunning, creativity, and a disregard for convention that he had never encountered before. They had turned their weaknesses into strengths, their desperation into a weapon, and they had made a mockery of the Empire's pride. He clenched his cybernetic fist, the memory of the scarf-clad soldier etched into his mind. It wasn't fear he felt. It was respect, tinged with the bitter taste of defeat. The humans had sent a message, and it was one he would never forget. The council chamber was alive with noise, a cacophony of voices clashing in heated debate. Holographic displays hovered above the grand obsidian table, showing projections of Earth, reports of its defenses, and the estimated resources required for a full-scale invasion. The data painted a picture of simplicity. Earth was technologically inferior, its population spread thin across continents, and its military power insignificant by galactic standards. To many in the room, the decision seemed obvious, but the shadow of Commander Larneth's warning still lingered, casting doubt over what should have been an uncontested consensus. General Morvith stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding as he addressed the council. His silver-scaled armor gleamed under the artificial lights, a stark contrast to the darkened expressions of his peers. "Enough of this hesitation," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We are the Galactic Empire, the most advanced force this galaxy has ever known. Are we to cower before a primitive species simply because of one man's tales of failure?" The representatives murmured in agreement, nodding as Morvith paced the chamber. His confidence was infectious, his words carefully chosen to stoke the flames of pride and ambition. Commander Larnatha's failure was not the failure of the Empire. It was a failure of outdated tactics and complacency. The humans exploited his arrogance. Yes, but we have learned from his mistakes. We will not underestimate them again. Across the room, Larnath sat silently in the shadows, his imposing frame hunched as he listened to Morvith's speech. His cybernetic hand tapped the armrest of his seat, each metallic click a reminder of what he had lost. He had delivered his warning, but it was clear that Morvith's arrogance had drowned out its weight. Still, he remained, watching, waiting for the moment his voice might cut through the hubris surrounding him. "Let us not forget," Morvith continued, his tone sharpening, "that we are not discussing a civilization equal to our own. The humans are fragmented, their nations divided, their technology centuries behind ours. They are not warriors. They are scavengers, opportunists who thrive on chaos. A single decisive strike will shatter their will to resist and bring them to their knees." The chamber erupted in applause, the sound reverberating off the high ceilings. Morvith turned toward Larnath, his golden eyes glinting with contempt. "Unless, of course, our esteemed veteran would like to add another tale of woe to discourage us." Zarkith rose slowly, his movements deliberate. The applause died as all eyes turned to him, the room falling into an uneasy silence. His presence, battered yet unyielding, seemed to fill the space, his every scar and cybernetic enhancement a testament to battle survived. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of years. "You speak of humans as if they are insects unworthy of respect," Larnath said, his gaze locking onto Morvith. "That was the same mistake my forces made. It cost them their lives." Morvith smirked, leaning casually against the table. "And whose fault was that, Commander? Leadership, perhaps?" Zarkith ignored the jab, stepping closer to the center of the room. "You underestimate them because their weapons are crude, their technology limited. But what you fail to understand is that war, to humans, is not just a means of conquest. It is a crucible that has shaped their existence for millennia. They do not fear it. They embrace it." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Some of the representatives shifted uncomfortably, their confidence wavering under the weight of his conviction. Larnath pressed on, his voice rising. "I saw it with my own eyes. They are cunning, resourceful, and relentless. They turn desperation into a weapon. They laugh in the face of death, mock their enemies, and thrive in chaos. You think a single strike will break them? It will unite them." Morvith scoffed, his smirk growing. "Dramatic, as always. But your fear is showing, old man. Perhaps you've spent too long in the past, clinging to your failures. This is a new era, and the Empire cannot afford to hesitate." Zarkith's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist, the faint hum of servos audible in the silence that followed. "It is not hesitation," he said, his voice cold. "It is wisdom. Wisdom born from battles you've never fought, against an enemy you cannot comprehend." Morvith turned to the council, addressing them with practiced ease. "We have heard enough of this defeatist rhetoric. The Empire's strength lies in action, not in fear. I propose we move forward with the invasion and show the humans their rightful place." The chamber erupted into cheers and applause, the decision seemingly sealed. Larnath stood motionless, his expression unreadable as the council prepared to vote. The holographic display shifted, projecting a tally of the representatives' choices. One by one, the votes lit up in favor of the invasion, a growing sea of green that drowned out the scattered red dissenters. When the final vote was cast, Morvith turned back to Larneth, his expression triumphant. "There you have it, Commander. The Council has spoken. Your warnings have been noted and dismissed." Zarkis stepped forward, his cybernetic arm whirring, as he pointed directly at Morvith. "You are leading them to their deaths," he said, his voice steady but laced with quiet fury. "You think this will be an easy victory, but the humans will surprise you. They always do." Morvith chuckled, brushing off the warning with a wave of his hand. "Then let them surprise me. I welcome the challenge." The council began to disperse, representatives filing out of the chamber, their minds already turning to the logistics of war. Larneth remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the emptying room. For all his efforts, his words had fallen on deaf ears. The die had been cast, and the Empire's path was set. As the last of the council members exited, Larneth turned and made his way to the doors. Before he crossed the threshold, he paused and looked back at the now empty chamber. The weight of his failure settled over him like a cloak, but deep within, a flicker of resolve remained. "They will learn," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "They will learn the hard way." With that, he stepped into the shadows, leaving the council to its fate. The invasion began with the precision of a machine, the Empire's fleet descending upon Earth like a storm of fire and steel. General Morvith stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, watching as waves of plasma bombs lit up the atmosphere below. The human cities, vast clusters of lights from orbit, flickered and dimmed under the relentless assault. His lips curled into a self-satisfied grin. The humans were proving as weak and disorganized as he had predicted. "Ground forces are deploying," reported one of the tactical officers, his multi-eyed face reflecting the dim glow of the bridge's holographic interface. "Minimal resistance detected." "Of course," Morvith said, clasping his hands behind his back. "They lack the coordination to mount a meaningful defense. This campaign will be over within days." But as the minutes passed, a strange tension began to creep into the air. Reports from the ground became fragmented, interrupted by static and bursts of garbled noise. Morvith's confidence began to waver as the holographic map displayed scattered points of resistance, far more organized than anticipated. Entire battalions of his soldiers had gone silent. Then came the first visual feed. The screen flickered to life, showing a darkened urban landscape. Fires raged in the distance, casting long shadows across the ruins of skyscrapers. A squad of Empire soldiers moved cautiously through the debris, their armor gleaming under the orange glow. Suddenly, a blinding flash filled the screen, followed by a deafening explosion. When the feed stabilized, the squad was gone. Only smoking craters remained. The camera panned to a nearby rooftop, where a group of human fighters emerged. They wore mismatched gear, some clad in scavenge armor, others in simple civilian clothing. One of them, a tall figure carrying an old rifle, looked directly into the camera. He raised 2 fingers in a mock salute before the feed went black. "What is this?" Morvith demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. "Who is leading them?" "Uncertain, sir," the tactical officer replied. "They appear to be using unconventional tactics, ambushes, sabotage, coordinated strikes." "It's chaotic. It's desperate," Morvith corrected, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. Desperation is no match for superior firepower. But the chaos only grew. Reports flooded in from across the battlefield. Human forces luring Imperial troops into traps, hacking into the fleet's communication systems, even repurposing their own destroyed equipment into makeshift weapons. The humans seemed to anticipate every move, striking precisely where they were least expected. It wasn't just desperation, it was strategy. On the surface, General Elias Kane surveyed the battlefield from a makeshift command center hidden within the ruins of a factory. His sharp features were illuminated by the faint glow of holographic displays, his piercing blue eyes scanning every detail with calculated intensity. A man in his 50s, Kane carried himself with the authority of someone who had seen too many wars but refused to falter. Around him, his team of strategists worked tirelessly, their movements efficient and focused. "Report," Kane said, his voice calm but firm. "They've deployed heavy armor along the eastern corridor." One of his officers replied, "But we've rigged the bridges with explosives. They'll never see it coming." Kane nodded, his mind already working through the next series of moves. He turned to another officer, a grizzled man named Captain Marlowe, who had fought alongside him in countless battles. "And the sniper teams?" "In position," Marlowe said, his tone grim. "Picking them off one by one." Kane allowed himself a brief smile. "Good. Keep the pressure on them. They think they're hunting us, but they don't realize they're the ones being hunted." Above the battlefield, Morvith's frustration boiled over. He paced the bridge of his flagship, barking orders at his officers. "Deploy the full fleet. I want every city leveled, every human eradicated. Do not stop until they're begging for mercy." The tactical officer hesitated. "General, the humans, they've somehow disabled 3 of our cruisers. We've lost control of the orbital defense grid." Morvith froze, his eyes narrowing. "What?" Before he could demand further explanation, the bridge's alarms blared. The holographic display shifted to show a swarm of small, agile ships rising from Earth's surface. They weren't part of any known military. Converted cargo vessels, private craft, even old shuttles patched together with scrap. But they moved with alarming coordination, weaving through the Empire's defenses and targeting key vulnerabilities. One of the ships collided with an Imperial frigate, detonating in a massive explosion that tore the vessel in half. Another released a barrage of EMP pulses, disrupting the fleet's targeting systems. Morvith gritted his teeth as the humans continued their assault, their creativity and audacity rendering his fleet's superiority meaningless. "They've turned the asteroid belt into a minefield," the tactical officer reported, panic creeping into his voice. "We're being funneled into a kill zone." "Impossible," Morvith growled. This is insanity." "It's human," Larnatha's voice cut through the tension. The veteran stepped onto the bridge, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos around him. His expression was calm, almost resigned, as he looked at the holographic display. "I told you, they don't fear war. They thrive in it." Morvith spun to face him, his anger barely contained. "You dare lecture me now? This is your fault. Your failure to eliminate them when you had the chance." Zarkith shook his head, his cybernetic hand resting on the hilt of his staff. "No, General. This is your failure. Your arrogance blinded you, and now you're paying the price." The ship shuddered violently as another explosion rocked the fleet. On the surface, Kane watched through his binoculars as the Empire's forces began to crumble. He gave a single nod, his voice cutting through the comms with quiet determination. "Advance." The human forces surged forward, exploiting every weakness, dismantling the Empire's war machine piece by piece. In the final moments of the battle, Morvith stood on the bridge, his pride shattered as he watched his fleet burn. The humans had done the unthinkable. Not only had they resisted, but they had turned the tide against one of the most powerful armadas in the galaxy. Zarkith turned to leave, his steps slow but steady. As he reached the doorway, he glanced back at Morvith, who stood frozen, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. "Remember this, General. They don't fight like us. They fight to win." With that, Larna disappeared into the shadows, leaving Morvith to face the consequences of his hubris. On the surface, Kane stood amidst the ruins, the echoes of victory ringing in his ears. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of, and the galaxy would never forget.